Hi everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at section 2 of chapter 22. And this is just going to go over just a brief overview of the immune system. So remember in the last video I talked about how the immune system isn't a true organ system because of the fact that it doesn't have organs. It is going to be made up of cells and molecular structures. And that's what we're going to be taking a look at here in this section. And then we're going to be taking a look at the two general types of immunity that we are going to have in the body before we dive into the specifics on them. So let's first take a look at the immune cells. We know a lot of these immune cells already, right? We know about leukocytes. We looked at leukocytes way back in chapter 18 when we talked about hemopoiesis and talked about their formation in the red bone marrow. So remember that there are those three granulocytes that we covered. We had neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. And remember there were the two agranulocytes, which were monocytes and lymphocytes. So now the time has come for B lymphocytes and T lymphocytes to really take off, because that's really what we focus on a lot in this chapter are these T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. And we're also going to introduce a new lymphocyte, which is called NK or natural killer cells here. We've already talked about monocytes, how when they leave the tissue, when they leave the blood and enter the tissue, they are going to become macrophages. So we'll take a look at them a little bit more because we'll, talk about their main function and the different types of immunity that we have. So let's take a look at some other structures. So we'll introduce a few more of these cells that we haven't introduced in the last section, but we're also going to be taking a look at where they are going to be housed inside of the body. So basically, where are they found? Where are they just kind of hanging out in the body? So remember that they can circulate in the blood, but most of the leukocytes are actually found in body tissue. So let's take a look at the different body tissues that they're found in. So first of all, remember this is what we talked about in the last chapter about these secondary lymphatic structures and how those are going to be these structures that are going to house these different immune cells. You have T lymphocytes, you have B lymphocytes, you have macrophages here, you have dendritic cells here, you also have natural killer cells here. So you have a lot of different cells that are found in the lymph nodes and the spleen and the tonsils and MALT. We also are going to find macrophages specifically in select organs as well. So the thing with macrophages and looking at select organs is they can either be a permanent resident, meaning that they are going to stay exclusively in that organ and never leave. We'll talk about some in the respiratory system that are going to stay inside of the alveoli. So, and also you might have remembered the microglia of the brain. Those are also going to be specific macrophages that are permanent residents of those organs. But you also have some that can migrate from different organs as well. So that's what's going on with our macrophages. You have dendritic cells. So dendritic cells are going to hang out in the skin, and they are going to hang out in the mucosal membranes. So what they do is they are constantly looking and finding any pathogen that crosses this external barrier that we're going to be taking a look at later on. And what they do is when they do come across this pathogen, they are going to engulf it. They're going to immediately go into the lymph and eventually go to the lymph node, and then these are going to be hanging out to take care of them. You also have some more dendritic cells that are going to be found in there as well. So that's where these dendritic cells are going to hang out. It's going to be in the skin and mucosal membranes. And then let's take a look at mast cells. Mast cells are very similar to basophils. We'll talk about their main function later on when we look at inflammation, but they are found in connective tissue throughout the body, and usually they are sitting close by small blood vessels. You have lots in the dermis, you have lots in the mucosa of the respiratory tract, the GI tract, the urinary tract, and places like that. So those are the main cells. So again, we will talk about each and every one of these later on, since these are the key players in our immune system. So now let's take a look at these things that the book has termed molecular structures. So cytokines are going to be these small soluble proteins that are going to help regulate immune activity. And there are several different types of cytokines. We're going to talk about some cytokines that are going to be found in the innate immune system. And we're going to be talking about some that are going to play a role in the adaptive immune system. So these are new terms for us, right? They introduce these, but we're actually going to be talking about them at the end of this section. So the innate and adaptive immune systems are going to be these two big major immune or defense systems that we are going to have in the body. So we will get to those here in a second, but cytokines are going to play a role in both of them. They are like local hormones. They are chemical messengers that are going to be released from a cell, and they are going to bind to receptors of target cells. So the most common ones are going to be either autocrine or paracrine, but you can have some, very few, that can circulate in the blood and act systemically and kind of like an endocrine response. But a lot of them are going to act on the cell that releases it. That's your autocrine. Or you are going to have some that are going to act on local or neighboring cells. That's your paracrine. So these terms were introduced back in the endocrine system. Because they're kind of these local hormones, these chemical messengers, they are going to have a shorter half-life than a lot of the normal regular hormones that we introduced back in the endocrine system. So as far as cytokine effects, lots of different effects because of the fact that we have so many different types of cytokines. Let's take a look at this table down here. Some different categories of cytokines we have are interleukins. We see interleukins later on. And other ones are interferons. I introduced this in the last, or mentioned this, I guess I should say, in the last section. So we will look at them again later on. We don't really talk about the tumor necrosis factor. We mentioned these back in the blood chapter, these colony stimulating factors. They're ones that stimulate leukopoiesis. So we won't look at them again, but we mentioned them already. So the two that we are going to look at later on in this chapter are interleukins and interferons. You can see you have several different interleukins. You have a few interferons as well. So just depending on which of these cytokines is released is going to determine the effects. So they can go in and regulate and facilitate immune system activities. It's a really good way for cells to communicate with one another, kind of saying, hey, I've been infected. I just want you to know so you can do something to save yourself. They also go in and regulate the inflammatory response. They control behavior development of these different effector cells of immunity. They also can directly destroy cells, so they serve as weapons to destroy cells. And then some of them are going to influence non-immune cells like neurons. So again, so many different functions here. So as we get to cytokines, then we'll talk more about those specific functions later on. So now let's go ahead and introduce, or I guess I shouldn't say introduce because I just introduced the two categories of the immune system on the last slide. Let's go ahead and take a look at them a little bit more. We're going to compare and contrast the two categories here. So these two main defense systems that we have in the body, it's going to be an innate immunity, and we also have something called the adaptive immunity. Some books will call the innate a non-specific immunity, and some books or websites will call the adaptive a specific immunity. And it really kind of goes along with this right here as far as specificity of cell response. That's one of the big places that they are going to differ. And we'll talk about that later on. We'll compare them a little bit more here in a second. So with these two categories, they're going to be organized based on the type of immunity they provide. Some of the key players that are going to be found in the immune system, in each of these little defense systems that we have. but they're going to work together to protect us against harmful agents. That's the key thing, is the fact that they are working together to make sure that we don't get sick. Let's talk about how they differ. Cells, number one. Look at this, T cells and B cells over here in the adaptive immunity, but you don't have them over here in the innate immunity. So we'll get more into the different cells that are involved. Look, macrophages over here, NK cells, specificity. So I talked about how the innate immunity is going to also sometimes be referred to as non-specific, and that's because of the fact that it is going to protect us against numerous substances. So we'll get into that in a second. Also, the mechanism of eliminating each of the harmful substances is different. I mean, just taking a look at what macrophages do compared to, we'll take a look at later what NK cells do. It's going to kind of prove this point. But also the amount of time for response. These are immediate. It's an immediate response. This one over here takes a week or two to respond. So this is going to have a little lag time. But we have this here to that's working immediately to kind of go in and slow the growth of the pathogen or kill it off. And then the adaptive is going to kick in later to kind of further boost that immunity as well. So let's look into the innate a little bit more. The innate, if you know what innate means outside of, A and P, it has to do with it being present at birth. And that's exactly what we have here, is an innate immunity, something that's going to be present at birth, something that we are born with. It's non-specific because it protects us from so many different substances. It doesn't care what it is going to try and kill it. So another good thing about it is we don't have to have been exposed to it before for this innate immune response to kick in. Again, it's non-specific. It doesn't care what it is. It's just going to try and kill it. The cells, we'll talk about the cells that are included, but we have these, it's responsible for the first and second line of defense. It's responsible for protecting us overall. We have our barriers like the skin and the mucosal membranes. These are going to make sure that nothing even gets into our body. But then if something happens to cross the skin or the mucous membranes, then we are going to have all of these other non-specific cellular and molecular internal defenses that help try and kill the pathogen as well. Again, another great thing is that it responds immediately. It's always there. It responds immediately, very quick. One of the drawbacks is it's not as potent as the adaptive immunity is going to be. Sometimes it is enough to protect us and not get us sick, but sometimes it's not, and the adaptive is going to come in and kill off that foreign substance that has invaded our body. Another thing with another drawback with the innate immunity is the fact that there's no memory to it. So because it's non-specific, because it doesn't care what it's killing off, it's not going to be able to remember it. So that's a huge thing about the innate immunity, is the fact that it has memory. And when we get that memory, once the adaptive immunity remembers that pathogen, it can come in full force the second, third, fourth times, any subsequent exposure after that. So that's the beauty of our adaptive immune response that we have. So let's take a look a little bit more at our adaptive immunity. It's also known as acquired. So something that we're not born with is going to be, I guess I shouldn't say not that we're not born with. We'll kind of get into the specifics about it, but we do acquire this immunity through some type of exposure. So we'll get to that later on. It is specific, meaning that these T cells and B cells that are involved are going to respond to one specific foreign substance, and will completely ignore other ones. But that's fine. We've got millions of these cells, these T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, so they are there to try and respond to these millions of foreign substances that we might come into contact each day of our lives. But again, one of the drawbacks, it's going to take days for it to be effective. So that's why if you're first exposed to a pathogen, you will show sickness. If you have the cold or something like that, then you might run a little fever, get a runny nose or something like that, because of the fact that your innate immunity is going in and trying to fight it off. But the adaptive immunity, we'll talk about how it has to go through this whole process to eventually come in and fight off the infection a little bit later on. But again, it has memory, so the next time you're exposed to that same exact strain of the cold virus, then it can come back a lot stronger, and you usually don't get sick from that same exact cold strain, right? Because I know you're saying, Ms. Watson, I've had the cold several times. I don't know what you're talking about. It's because of how many different strains of the cold virus there is. Again, I talked about how viruses mutate like crazy, and there's so many different strains of all of these different viruses, and that's the reason why. So what we're going to do in the next section is we are going to focus on this innate immunity here. We are going to focus on our first line of defense, which is going to be skin and mucous membranes, and then we are going to look at our second line of defense, which is going to be a non-specific internal defense. So until next time.